And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Stefan Sindoni back with me, was with me about 3 years ago as we talked about parts of the Hollow Earth. He's a researcher. Early age, he was a little boy. He was an avid reader, spent a lot of time learning about American history, ancient civilizations, Greek mythology. And in order to uncover some of these ancient truths, he came to the realization that, you know what, he was an old soul living in a new embodiment. And here he is back on Coast to Coast, the newer version, Stefan Sindoni. Hey, Steph, how are you?
Pretty good, George. Thanks for having me on, George.
My pleasure. You know what? This story of the Hollow Earth is amazing. So many people are interested in this. Over the last several years, you haven't let go of this story. What have you been doing?
Well, the reason I haven't let go of it, George, is because it became personal. After reading the story and becoming enthralled by it, and basically I'll just start off. It's a man who shows up in the office of the Stockton editor's office in 1934 and claims to have discovered an ancient civilization 30 years earlier in 1904 while employed as a geologist for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England. So after reading this story in this Emily A. Frank book, I just felt unexplainably attracted to it, jotted down 7 clues, as I recall, from the legend, and decided to research the legend and try to solve it. But in the process of that, George, I was able to acquire photos of the man of the legend and handwriting samples, and lo and behold, it was like looking at a bookend, and there I was. And then when I matched up my signature to his, it was identical.
Are you saying that you're the reincarnated version of this guy?
No doubt about it, absolutely.
Other people beginning to agree with you?
Well, anybody who sees the photo, I had in the studio, we did a morph with the photo that I had and myself in the same position, the same angle, and when we dropped the photo down, everything lines up completely. And we're the same height, same build, we have the same mouth, the same posturing. And when I got his border crossings coming through Laredo, I decided, I was in the library at the time, and I'm there in front of the librarian. I'm looking at it. I said, just for the heck of it, let me just look at it once and then quickly just try to sign it just the way that I saw it the first time. I turned, on the back of the piece of paper, and when I did that, I put them up side by side, and there it was, probably 98% similar, and I was like, holy Toledo.
The guy's name was John Benjamin Body, but they called him J.C. Brown, right?
That is correct, yes.
What do we know about him?
Well, what we know is that he shows up in 1934, and he tells a representative of the Stockton Record that while he was employed for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England 30 years earlier, in 1904, that he came across an unusual rock basalt formation, and upon discovering it, he decided to dig it out. And after he started digging it out, 3 miles from the mouth of the tunnel, he found that there was gold-bearing ore that he believed was mined from an earlier race. Kept going, said the air was bad there, and he went approximately 11 miles inside the mountain, and at approximately a 2,300 feet level below the surface, he struck what he called the village. So he comes into a village where he says he found rooms with 12 feet copper tablets. They were 3 or 4 inches in concave. They were laid inside one another. Rooms were filled full of plates inscribed neatly. He found rooms with weapons, tempered gold spears, and what really blew him away was that the streets were laid out in a village, and in one room what he found was skeletons that were anywhere from 6 feet 6 inches tall up to 10 feet or more. Another room he found an embalmed, what he believed was a king and queen in robes, royal robes that we believe were the king and queen of that race. So he also found worship rooms. On the wall he found 3 giant crosses, not of the conventional modern type. He found a sun streamer worked in gold and copper. He said that he believed there were 13 statues that were made of gold and copper. And he said that he believed that this race was a people that were an important link in American history, that because they were highly skilled craftsmen, and the statues glowed as if they would use radium to make these statues. So he believed that they used radium to temper the copper. Now, this was back in 1904 when he made his discovery. So what he told the editor of the newspaper is that he wanted to enlist a corps of trained people who would pay for their services to assist him in cataloging these specimens, and the relics in this cave he wanted to remain intact. So there were 2 other caves there that he had located, and for those who would go with him up back to the Cascade Mountain Range area, he would then let them have the items in those 2 other caves.
How big underground was this?
Well, he claimed that it was a village that he ran into, so it was like a mini town there that he encountered.
Huh. And what happened to the occupants, the inhabitants?
Well, when he got there, he said everything was like thrown about as if someone had just left because, he had been approaching with his minor paraphernalia. So they must have been clanging and banging along the way to get there, but he said that people left in a hurry when he made his approach.
Where'd they go?
Excuse me?
Where would they go?
Where would they go? Probably further in. It's like just down the road, possibly.
Did they dig this out, or was this part of the hollow earth?
This was dug out. It was man-made, and it was lit up inside of this tunnel system that went for 11 miles down to where he found the village. So it was a man-made tunnel that was constructed, for these people to get to this village.
Huge. What would possess, Stephan, people to live underground like that?
Well, what would possess them is we have 2 things in history. We had the Ice Age, and we had the Great Flood, which all the religions talk about, and every culture has their own version of these 2 disastrous events. So these 2 events is what prompted people to go, into a shelter mode.
What a remarkable story. Has anybody since been able to go down there or find this?
Well, there are entrances that there are a number of entrances that lead to this village or this city there, but a lot of them because of the glacier runoff from the mountain, the silt, and the rocks falling have been sealed off and are very hazardous to try to venture further. So you'd be kind of risking your life to kind of try to go through these old caves or tunnel passageways that existed.
Now, in your particular case, Stephan, where you believe you're the reincarnated version of this guy, have you had strange dreams or anything like that would tie you into this area, this region?
Well, interestingly enough, when I first discovered that J.C. Brown was not J.C. Brown, he was John Benjamin Body, and I got his photo, I was sitting there one day in my apartment. So I went into a meditative state, and I'm a psychic clairvoyant, and I pick things up. So I had the photo, and I put it up to my third eye, and I just looked at the photo. I said, "Tell me how this happened," And then I got that I had to follow border crossings, and I got that they came into the United States and went on the Southern Pacific Railroad, making their way up to Dunsmuir, California, and they even showed me the route. And then in my mind's eye, I saw the train cars, the old train cars that he was sitting in with other gentlemen, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what does this mean? So I was able to go and get some maps, old railroad maps and whatever. And what I was able to learn was that they went to the Shasta Springs Resort in Dunsmuir, California, to go there to vacation. These guys were millionaires, and they went there. And when they were on the grounds there, walking around the grounds, they saw this unusual basalt rock formation. And being they were all geologists, they decided that they were going to dig this out. So going through the border crossings, I was able to tie in John Benjamin Body with Lord Cowdray, who was really born Sir Wheatman Pearson, and he was knighted in 1915. But on the border crossings, just as the legend said, 1904, there I had John Benjamin Body and Lord Cowdray coming in from Laredo, Texas, into the United States. So I was able to place them into the United States. And as I looked more into the border crossings, George, I got to see more of how this happened.
Have you had past life regression hypnosis?
Yes, I've had it once.
And did that amount to anything?
Yes, it did. It came up with a number of other existences that I've had. But this one is the strongest where I have supporting evidence to back it up.
That is something else. When did J.C. Brown die?
J.C. Brown died in May of 1940.
1940. Of natural causes or something?
Of natural causes, yes, in Scotland.
Well, that's one good thing.
And I reappeared here in this embodiment in 53. So 13 years later, I just came back out.
And here you are.
And here I am. Yes.
Obsessed with this story, aren't you?
Well, here's the thing, George. My John Benjamin's daughter, who survived him when he passed in 40, her name was Millicent Body. My mother's name is Millicent.
Oh, boy.
So I'm like, what are the odds that my mother and the daughter that I may have had, named in the previous embodiment had the same name? Plus, my mom is of Scottish and English ancestry, just like the man of the legend. I said to myself, is the universe playing tricks with me or have a sense of humor? I wonder.
All right, stay with us, Stefan. We're going to come back, talk more about this, and then we'll get into the hollow earth with phone calls as well next hour on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Stefan Sindoni with us. By the way, his websites are all linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. Well, what a great discovery, Stefan, that this region out there, 11 miles in, and then a big city. What do you think the population down there might have been?
Well, interestingly enough, through my travels going out there, I learned that there's a crystalline city that is underneath the bowels of that mountain, which supposedly has over 1.5 million people living there.
Right now?
Right now, as we speak.
What's their technology like?
Far advanced than we have.
Some people have always theorized that UFOs that are seen coming out of the hollow-type Earth might be those people. That's their technology. Possible?
Well, I can tell you that in 2009, 9909, I was on the mountain, came down, and when I got back into the town, I saw a fleet of ships leaving the mountain, heading east, and there was a lenticular cloud that opened up, and a friend of mine were both looking up, and they powered down with their lights to let me know that I was seeing what I was seeing. Maybe they even knew I was on the mountain that night, but they made themselves visible. It was a fleet of at least 20 ships that I saw that night.
And how were they shaped?
They were like saucers. These were like saucers. They weren't cylindrical. These were saucer in nature. These were small little ships.
And the occupants, do they look like us?
Underneath the mountain they do. I mean, there is a number of different races that are in the inner Earth. Telosians look like us, but they're taller. They're about 7 feet or a little taller. The Telosians, people from Telos. And
what kind of beings are they? I mean, are they benevolent?
Yeah, they're benevolent. Yeah, they're not malevolent whatsoever. They're friendly beings. They just don't want anything to do with our civilization. They feel that we're barbaric, and we just.
They may be right.
Well, they are right. I mean, we haven't evolved enough in 2,000 years to love thy brother. So God help us. And so that's probably what part of it is. They would like to interact with us, but we're just not ready.
Do they ever get hit by earthquakes?
I'm sure they do. That's why they're living underneath the hollows of the earth. But when you go down at least a mile and a half, it's you're not dealing with the same sort of gravity that we deal with here on the surface.
Well, that's true, and they don't have that kind of tectonic plate movement either.
Right. Yes. So, I know you're interested in Native American stories. So, if you'd like, I like to cut to the chase and give you something that most people aren't aware of who aren't Native American.
Fire away, Steph. Go ahead.
Okay. When I did this research in 2007 and early 2008, I decided to make my way up to the Pacific Northwest, and primarily to start with Mount Rainier and work my way down because of the Kenneth Arnold stories about seeing crafts above Mount Rainier. So I went up, and I had friends who were up in the Olympia, Washington area. So I went up to Olympia, Washington, and as I got there, the phone rang, and I just had put my luggage down, and it was a Native American elder from the Puyallup tribe, and said to my friend, "Is he there yet?" She says, "Stefan?" She says, "Yeah, he's right here." She says, "Can you put him on the phone?" So she says, "I'm not going to use his name. We'll say John wants to talk to you." So I grabbed the phone perplexedly, who could know that I'm here? And it turns out he says, "I'm coming over to talk to you." So now I looked at my friend and says, "How does he know I'm here?" She goes, "I have no idea. I said, who is he? She says, he's a Native American elder. He's a shaman. He's one of the chiefs in the tribe. He danced Sundance for 16 years out in the Arizona desert, and he's a shaman. So I waited, for the man to come over, and when he came over, first thing he did when he saw me was he said to me, do you realize that Jesus and Saint Germain are standing beside you? So now the hair on my neck, George, is raised because, I knew who Jesus was, but I never heard the name Saint Germain. And I was like, whoa, this is heavy. I didn't expect this today, not my wildest imagination. So he says, can we take a walk? So I said, sure, fine. So we walked around the property. And he said, I'm supposed to tell you about the history of our people. That's what I came here to tell you. So he told me about an oral history that spanned over 40,000 years that predated the Bering Strait story. And he said that, his people had come to Earth from a distant planet in another solar system, and they were taken underground by the ant people. And they had been there in the Ice Age, and they came out, and then they went back in, because of the Great Flood, and then they came back out again. So I was like, wow, this is interesting stuff. So I asked more and more questions of him, and I asked him because I was interested in Lemurians and the tall ones, and so he told me, he said that he was very familiar with them, and they stood 8 to 9 feet tall, and they wore buckskin clothing, and his grandfather would see them fishing in the Nisqually River, and the Nisqually River comes down from Mount Rainier through Tacoma, Washington, where their reservation was. He says his grandmother would also feed Bigfoot when they would come to the reservation because the animal was hungry, and when the animal was in danger, it would dematerialize itself at will, so no one could see it. Which I found interesting.
That's fascinating.
Told about another story, George, about a Suquamish elder who lived near the Suquama National Reserve, and he was catching salmon. He would put the salmon into his smoker to cook it. And on many occasions, Bigfoot would be seen taking the salmon out of his smoker. So what he did was he modified the smoker, making it taller in height, and he put a door on the smoker, a plexiglass door, so Bigfoot wouldn't take the salmon out until it had been done cooking.
I love it. That's a great story.
So these are just some of the stories. I mean, he also told me about his people and about the boarding schools that they were sent to, and he said they were punished if they spoke their own language. He said they put a bunch of different Bibles on the table, and they said, you need to pick a religion. We don't care which one you pick, but you have to choose one.
You have to pick one, yeah.
So he started laughing. He says, Stephanie goes, we tried them all. They didn't work. So him and I became friends, and I would visit him on the reservation a couple times. And I would go past the administrator's office on the reservations and found out that they were descendants of those who came over on the Mayflower.
Jeez.
So all these reservations have remnants of the original colonists who came here, and their jobs are to be the watchers of these Native Americans. I also made observations that near every federal penitentiary, it was next to a reservation. So, you go around, it's like, wow, it's like having a Burger King and a McDonald's right next door to one another. And also, one of the other things that I was very mindful of, looking at street names and signs, a lot of the streets were named after these administrators who, took care of the Native Americans on these reservations. So, there are over 300 reservations still in America right now, and it's sad because the karma of this country, is probably the way it is because they've never got restitution. I mean, there's a book that, for those listening out there who want to know more about this, is called Red Earth, White Lies, Native Americans by Vin Deloria Jr., and he talks about the plight of Native Americans. But one of the things I learned in that book, which was very helpful, was that there is a Dr. Stanley Lee, who was an archaeologist, and he made a very important discovery in 1951 in Shenandoah, Ontario, Canada. And what that was, he found 4 tribes of Native Americans and a bearded white man that were, the artifacts he found were dated about 45,000 years ago that predated the Bering Strait theory. So what happened was, when he went public with that, he lost his tenure, he lost his funding, and he was discredited. and that story kind of like had to go away. But the Salish were one of those groups that came down the Pacific Northwest, and that's where they migrated to after the Ice Age, which was like about 45,000 years ago, which kind of makes sense when you realize that if the Bering Strait story is disinformation, then this Stanley Lee, has the smoking gun as far as the origin of the Native Americans.
Now, with these Native Americans, are any of them underground?
I would say not now. They were, but they all came out.
Remember the Hopi talked about ant people?
Right, yeah. There were four groups. You had the Hopi, you had the Pueblo, you had the Zuni, and you had the Apache. They were the four that claimed that during these deluges or these great floods that either the snake people or the ant people befriended them and took them into the hollows of the earth.
Could you find the hollow earth now if you went looking?
Oh, absolutely.
You could go right in there.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go with myself. I'd need a group of people because I have shadows wherever I go, George, and
yeah.
That's one of the reasons why.
You may not come out. Well,
I've had attempts on my life. I've had people try to get me in places where they wanted to get me alone. And
not by the inner people.
No. This is by I'll call them the New World Watchers.
Yeah.
And they are a group that wants to keep everything status quo and keep everybody dumbed down. And people like myself, have a warning label. Researching can be hazardous to your health. So for that reason, I don't go out anymore to go researching things. The last time I spoke with you, I went out back to California to research the legend of J.C. Brown, to research two of the caves that I had found. And interesting thing is, we're doing the movie to get the movie out, but in one of the days on filming, we're sitting at the Dunsmuir, a diner in Dunsmuir, and two of the guys in the film crew said to me, "Stefan, do you realize there's a van outside?" I go, "Really? Okay." It says Shasta Carpet Cleaning. I says, "Okay, well, what's odd about that?" They says, "Well, it's got a satellite dish on the top of the roof of it." So
oops,
I says, okay.
They made a little mistake there, didn't they?
Yeah, so I started to laugh. I said, "Well, you know what?" I says, "We're not the only one filming a movie here today." So I went and asked one of the guys to do me a favor, call up information or get a Yellow Pages and see if there's actually a Shasta Carpet Cleaning that exists.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't.
Didn't think so.
Yeah, so, these are the kind of shenanigans that are played. And I've had instances where I was doing a TV show at the local college of the Siskiyous, talking about, the Hollow Earth, stories about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finished my season up in 2009 there, I was up in Ashland, Oregon. I get a phone call from a friend of mine who produced one of my shows. He said, "We just got a visit from the U.S. Forest Service and the FBI. They wanted to know if you dug any holes up on the mountain." I says, "I don't dig any holes." He says, "Well, somebody dug a big hole on Mount Shasta and they want to pin it on you." So I started laughing. I says, "Well, nobody's called me." He says, "Well, you're famous." I says, "Why?" He says, "They bought every episode of your show for that season." So they were looking for something, to see if I had been the one to have done that. So luckily for me, I didn't do that, and I don't know if they ever got who did it, but these are some of the things that, can happen when people are looking for things and searching for things. Now, one of the other things I can tell you is with the Native Americans, I went to a Drumming for Peace rally thereafter in Tacoma, and there were members of the tribes there. When they saw me, they said, "Let me see your hands." And I showed them my hands, and they said, "Do you know that St. Germain and Jesus is standing behind you?" In 2 consecutive days. And now I'm blown away again because I don't know these fellas either. And here they are telling me that there is a divine presence with me on the West Coast. So,
out of the blue, they just bring it up.
And then they invited me to a sweat lodge, and it was a sweat lodge at the Puyallup Reservation. So I went, and I'll call it a vision quest. And in the third round in the sweat lodge, in the session, everybody was talking about their prayers, their wishes, and what they wanted for the world, and this or that. They're praying for all different things, and afterwards, it's getting so blazing hot in there, George, that we all go into this euphoric type of a trance.
It's pretty dangerous in those places.
Yes, it is, yes. You have to be in good condition, and yet you have to hydrate very well. I had a couple of bottles of Gatorade, before going in, so I was able to get enough, electrolytes in me. But on the third or fourth round is when it gets tough, because now all of a sudden you better be in good shape. So on the third or fourth round, I started to go into this place, I'll call it. It was... I guess people who take ayahuasca or LSD would say they were in that hallucinogenic state. And what I got to see when I got to that place, I'm looking out in front of me, and there is an alien gray just staring at me. So now I'm looking at the ant person, because that's what he was. I would say, the way the Native Americans would describe him. And I'm looking at him, and he's trying to read me. And I said, not today, pal. And I just went back into myself, and I excused myself from that round of sweat, and they probably, thought I was, a cream puff or whatever. But I didn't tell anybody that day what had just happened.
Are you sure you weren't hallucinating?
No, not at all, because I don't drink, I don't take drugs.
But I mean, just being in that kind of environment.
Right, yeah, and they were all talking about things, different things like Bigfoot and other things that I realized, wow, these things do exist, because here they are in prayer and ceremony talking about them. And so I realized that, what had just happened to me was a reality check as to, these alien grays who people talk about grays. I mean, when I was in Mount Shasta, when I had met, I'll just use the first name, Diane, and she cried to me and hugged me when she met me. She says, I have to tell you. I says, what is it? She says, I've been abducted many times. And I'm looking at her like, really? So I gave her a big hug, and all of a sudden she shows me all the marks in her body, and she's very arthritic with very bad arthritis and have a difficulty walking. She had a special bed that she would lay in to alleviate the pain, but she said throughout her whole life this was going on. And I'm looking at her like, I've just recently saw a gray in a vision. Now all of a sudden I'm being reminded that, hey, there are people that are getting abducted. So I realized, these things that people talk about, are really happening, and when you start to go around the country, like I was going around the country, I started to learn these things. And then like a little further down, I went down to the East Ranch, and James Gilliland has a ranch in Trout Lake, Washington.
Yeah, he does.
And the first evening I'm on the ranch, it started to rain that night, so we really couldn't get out to see the UFOs that they claimed, were on the property. So I went back to my tent, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden I saw this large, ominous figure hovering over my tent that was 8.5 to 9 feet tall. So I opened up the zipper, and there's a set of eyes looking at me, human eyes. So like I almost freaked out. So I went, opened up the zipper with my flashlight to come out, try to find it, but it had dematerialized. My friend who was in the next tent said it went out into the field and just stood there for about 15 minutes, and she was staring at it, petrified. She said she couldn't move. So that following morning, I talked to people on the ranch because the dogs were barking that night, and there was a lot of commotion. And a number of people said they saw them. There was more than one. And then when I talked to James, he said, yeah, they come out from underneath Mount Adams, because his property is like 8 miles away, straight in front of the mountain where his property is, and they're known to come on his property. So that there was another wake-up call. And then the following night, we're in his circle, I'll call it, and it's about 30 people in the circle, and we're looking up, and I'll call it extraterrestrial skyway. There was 24 crafts going back and forth as though it was I-5 on a Saturday night, and I'm going like, this is amazing. And all we saw was crafts going by across the complete sky from east to west or north to south, and they were moving at rapid speed and very, very high up. I mean, where you couldn't even take their photos, but it was though there was a portal right above his ranch. So when I got to see that, I knew they weren't ours. It wasn't our military, and it had to be, an extraterrestrial presence that I was seeing. And even when I was
Remarkable.
up in Ashland, Oregon, on a horse ranch, there were many occasions where I would see a craft, in the night sky, and I would say, "Oh my God, I don't see this when I'm on the East Coast, but if I go to the West Coast, there they are."
They're everywhere.
Yeah, it's the mountain ranges. The mountain ranges from Mount Rainier all the way down to Shasta and the other mountains as well is where it's a hot spots for UFO activity.
Do you believe the hollow earth is all over the planet not just restricted to, let's say, the Mount Shasta area?
Oh, absolutely. I can give you instances for it right now. I mean, for example, we'll use Tibet, for example, and China. China wanted Tibet for a reason. In Lhasa Palace, there's an entrance that goes down into the hollow earth from there in the palace, where the Dalai Lama would meet with the king of the world. So the Chinese wanted to put their own Dalai Lama in there, so that way they could get access to this entrance into the inner world.
Exactly. Stay with us, Stefan. We're going to talk more about this and take phone calls next on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, we're going to take your phone calls this hour and continue chatting with Stefan Sindoni about his remarkable journey through the middle underground inner earth. It really is amazing. Welcome back. Stefan Sindoni with us. And, of course, Stefan, when you were getting involved with this in the first place, and then you realize, you know what, I could be the reincarnated J.C. Brown, were you in shock?
Yes, I was, because when I got the photo, and at first I was in denial, and everybody who I showed the photo says to me, do you realize that's you? And I was like, is that? I said, no, he looks more like my grandfather. And they go, no, that's you. And then when I was in the studio making a comedy CD, I was talking to my editor, and he said to me, he's a Bible Belt Christian. I told him about it. He said, well, you know what? He said, show me the photo. I did. And he restored it, colorized it, and he said, let's put you up on the wall in the same angle, and I'll morph you in to the photo. I said, okay, for the joke of it, we did it. And, George, I got to tell you, it lined up completely. I mean, you know, it was just amazing that I just went right into him, and I was like, I get it. I get it now. And everybody said to me, look, you're going to have to accept this. A lot of people will have a hard time with it. I go back to the biblical text, and it talks about being born again.
Sure.
And so Jesus being Elijah and other people before him. I go, look, if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. You know, so that was kind of like the way I looked at it. I like to right now switch gears if I can. You talked about proving hollow earth, and I want to just do that real quick with you, if I may. Years back, Art Bell had Jan Lamprecht on his show, and he talked about Chernobyl, the nuclear disaster, and a couple of years later, the radiation mysteriously was around the Antarctica and the South Pole. Yet none of the other areas on the outside of the air had experienced any of that radiation. So here is what I profess. There is a bird, and I came out with a video a couple of years ago about the Siberian Orc. It's an orc, a little bird that travels from eastern Siberia and makes its way to Antarctica.
Okay.
And stays there, you know, for a couple of weeks, you know, and comes back after the winter. So what I profess, and after I came out with the video, they mysteriously put this bird on the endangered species list. But luckily, there's another bird called the little auk, which is found in Greenland, Iceland, and Spitsbergen. And here's my point. If we attach a GPS device to either one of these birds and a webcam to record their journeys from the North Pole to the South Pole region, what we may discover is they're not traveling 8,000 miles outside of the Earth to get to the South Pole. They're venturing into a hollow Earth opening in the North Pole, traveling only 5,000 miles, and coming out at the South Pole, where they stay and go back to the North Pole thereafter.
When all this is being done, when history rewrites all this, what will they say?
Well, what they'll say is that the Anunnaki, the Watchers, were the ones who confused religions, confused languages, and created a world that was like made out of BS and all garbage. I mean, all the religious texts, George, are the greatest lies ever written. And when you discover this, and for example, I know that we're in Passover or whatever, but I can say this. Think about this, George. Moses spent 40 years with the Jews on the desert. I've been in Coney Island on 4th of July, and I've seen Hasidic Jews go on the beach, and they couldn't take the sun and the heat for 1 hour and came back complaining and moaning that it was too hot.
Well, that's because they've been Americanized.
Yeah, well, here's the point. You know, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, the story is probably too good to believe. The story of Moses, for example, is a borrowed story from Sargon the Great, which was 1,000 years earlier. The same reed.
You don't think that story even happened, do you?
No, I don't think any of them happened, and I'll prove to you why. I did a series called He Walked the Americas. It talks about Jesus walking the Americas, and it can be found on my website, webflix.com. It's a plug, I guess, but 18 stories about Jesus walking the Americas to meet the Native Americans. He was taken there by the Essenes. Now, there was 18 lost years of Jesus where they say he spent time in Tibet and China and worked his way to the Americas. But who brought him there with the Essenes, which was Nagashita, who was Enki's son, who palled up with Enki's brother, Enlil, to go ahead and confuse the languages there in North America and try to give these Native Americans Jesus. But in his travels through North America, they tried to kill him. And next thing you know, they got him out of there on a boat after being here in the Americas. So there's been a grand deception as to who all these religious prophets really were. And if you look at all the books and you put them all together, and all the stories about the flood, and every country has their different stories, but the names are changed to protect the innocent.
True.
But it's all modified BS, George. True. You know, and those who come out, like Eric Parker, who's been on your show, or Zachariah Sitchin, who talks about different things, when they give you the facts and the evidence, you know, numbers don't lie and liars don't figure. You know, I'm not much on faith. I'm more on facts. And when you tell me I have to believe in someone who died for my sins, you know, and I'm supposed to feel guilty, I don't buy it. I can't buy that, you know, 50 people can't agree if they see an accident on what they actually saw in a court of law. So when you take a story that's been handed down and redacted hundreds of times and broken down, then you wonder, like, who's going to benefit? Well, the controllers will benefit because people who are not educated, who don't read, find a lot of people today who don't read, they like to be told what to do. You know, wear the Yankees, Mets hats, the California Angels, the jerseys of the teams, and then I'm benefiting from that. All they're doing is being dumbed down, and they're being kind of like lulled to sleep, or like a sidebar type thing, taking them away from reality and getting them to be brought into this dumbed-down mentality. You know, people die, George, from lack of knowledge. And I can tell anyone listening right now, the mind is like a parachute. It can only work if it's open. So as I did more research, like, for example, Baffin Bay, the strongest currents in the world are at Baffin Bay. Baffin Bay has the deepest water. If we sent a submarine down, independent expedition in Baffin Bay, they would find an inner Earth opening in Baffin Bay. In South Antarctica, the Trans-Antarctic Mountain Range, which has two openings, 50 yards wide, half of a football field, and is rumored to be the site of Operation High Jump, where the Nazis and our Air Force had a battle, and we lost to them. But that is an opening to the inner world there in the Trans-Antarctic Mountain Range, which the mountain range is over 16,000 feet, which can be found on Google Earth. If you look hard enough, you'll find it. Then we've had stories like the Smoky God revealed by Willis George Emerson about a father and son who journey into the interior of the earth, and they spend 2 years with the giants. Well, after I narrated that story, I had a friend contact me. He says, please, I want you to research it. You go to the library, research it. So I did. And what I did validated was there was an Olaf Jansen. He did come to Chicago in 1890, like they said, migrated to California, and I even found the ship captain of the ship that picked him up in 1829. He was born in Scotland. So when I found all these facts, I go, wait a minute. These things had to happen, but yet people don't want to understand that they've been lied to for a long, long time.
Yeah, but you seem to think that the entire texts of the Bible are wrong.
I think a great deal of them are wrong, yes.
But that's your opinion.
That's my opinion, and it's a lot of scholars' opinions. You got to remember, if people that aren't tenured and people that aren't getting paid, to talk about it, religion is big business, George. If it wasn't, why would they give them tax-free status?
Well, I just did almost a whole show last night where half of the theologians are fighting that Jesus existed, and the other half of academia says he never did.
Well, I can tell you this. He existed because the Native Americans say it's so. And when I find the corroborating evidence with the Anunnaki and the fact that what they did to disguise it and what they wanted to do was to control the masses, then the dots for me connect. And it's about faith for some people, but when you talk about, walking on water, turning, water to wine and things like that, to me that's a leap of faith, But did he exist? The evidence that I've got supports that he did.
Let's go to the phones now. You ready?
Sure.
Desiree in Toledo, Ohio gets us started. Hi there, Desiree.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Go ahead, hon.
Okay, don't really talk about this that much. We went with a couple friends of mine to Phoenix, Arizona back in 2005. We went on a retreat type of thing to Paistua Peak. It's the mountain there in Phoenix. There's an Indian tribe there that will take you into the desert, and you kind of get in touch with your spirituality, if you know what I mean. And I guess this Indian tribe is descendants of like some ancient Toltec, Pasqua Indian tribe from way back. I can't even tell you when, but that's what they told us. Anyways, we had a very, very, very strange thing happen to us.
What was that?
It was probably about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We're in our tents, and two of the gentlemen, Native American gentlemen that were there with us, were calling something. I don't know what it was, but we did kind of see a bright light, bright light, brighter than any light I've ever seen before. And we kind of got really freaked out and scared. Now, have you ever heard of something like that happening? We weren't sure if it was aliens or...
Well, where'd you see the light? Just hovering or what?
It almost like it came from underneath the rocks. Like, it just...
Well, there's a great possibility what you saw was ball plasma. Stephen, that happens.
Well, yeah, it can be ball plasma, but also, too, there can be a holographic entrance that she was standing near where this craft appeared from.
Yeah, but if it's lights, to me, it sounds like it could be ball plasma.
Well, another thing, too, George, you got to
small.
know that if a craft is in close enough proximity to you, you're going to get blinded by the lights like you would headlights on high beam.
Sure.
So, I mean, you can't just discount it and say that it's plasma, because if it's close enough to you, it's like a deer in the headlights. The deer doesn't see the car when he gets hit.
Ryan in Yakima, Washington. First-time caller. Ryan, good to have you with us.
Good to have you talk to me, too. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
So, yeah, when I was younger out in Yakima, I've seen a lot of dark shadow figures show up around at night, and I'd wake up to them in my room, and they're taller figures. They're like 10 feet tall. And I've also seen Sasquatch itself walk past my house. It was like limping, and it was looking at me. I was wondering if those were related, and also I was wondering if that's because I'm so close to the Cascade Mountain Range.
Maybe.
George, you want me to answer that?
Yeah, I sure do.
Well, the Cascade Mountain Range is where I started my research from, and absolutely everything is happening near the Cascade Mountain Range, all the National Reserve parks there, and that's where you'll see a great deal of this phenomena happening.
Why that region? What's so special about that area, Steve? Well,
here's why, George. The continent of Lemuria, which is 5,000 miles wide and 3,000 miles long, when it sank, the eastern portion of it crashed into the western United States, and that's why you've got the Andreas Fault there. That fault line exists because of this continent, colliding with what was North America, and that's why you look at the Rockies, east of the Rockies, west of the Rockies. It's like two different, continents. So what's happening is this Lemurian sacred ground on the west coast is where it all happens, because most of it is all mountainous, and everything is happening below the surface. And all these mountains, I believe, are all openings for these crafts to enter and leave.
Are they silent when they go in?
Yes.
What's the biggest?
The biggest, they have motherships that go in. I've seen motherships hovering over Mount Shasta, Mount Adams, Mount Rainier that are as big as a football field.
Jeez. Scott in Redding, California. Hey, Scott, welcome to the program. You're on the air with us.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I live in the Mount Shasta area, and as a matter of fact, I was at the filming when Stefan was here. What was it, Stefan? 2 years ago?
2 years ago. Who is this now, Scott?
Pardon me?
Yeah, his name's Scott.
I remember you. You're in our movie that we're editing.
Great. How you doing?
Good.
You know, I heard you mention two really interesting things here that I've heard in this conversation. Is one is you mentioned Saint Germain a couple of times, and a couple of Indians had mentioned him to you. And did you know that the Mount Shasta Springs Resort is now the property of the Saint Germain Society?
Absolutely. And, here's the thing. Here's what ties in, Scott. When I was making the movie, I had asked the people. I was doing a lecture at the College of the Siskiyous, and some of the elders from the St. Germain Foundation heard me there. Right. And I told them I wanted to see the property, to go on the property, because I believed that I was there as a guest in that property as a previous life. So they invited me on the property. And when I was on that property, I got to see this rock basalt formation that I believe that I had entered as J.C. Brown. So, yeah, and the reason why they let me on the property is because they asked me if I had read any of the I Am books, from Guy Ballard, and I did. I read it. You have to read a couple of books before they'll even consider to take you in. But, they befriended me. They took me in to show me these things. And I met people, elders from their organizations, and their contention was St. Germain, is very close to Mount Shasta and in the mountain itself. Now, matter of fact, as a segue, Scott, there was a man while I was out there, when I met you there, who interviewed the following day. His name was Brad. He had been hiking on that property on Thanksgiving, and he and his daughter had mysteriously run into a man by those back doors who was wearing a white robe, 7 feet tall.
Those are right above Moss Spray Falls, right behind the resort.
Exactly. And the man was wearing a white robe, long flowing hair, and came out of nowhere, told them that they had just found the back entrance to Telos, where they like to come in.
Yeah.
So I had to meet this man, and he was 77 years old, older, nice gentleman. He invited me to his house. We did the interview there. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking him in the eyes, and I had been in front of the property, and this formation looks like a scene out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And when I was touching this rock formation, I was trying to get it to open up, because I believe there was probably a holographic entrance there or a swivel-based rock. But what I wanted to know, I was hoping that this Lemurian, this guy with the white flowing hair and the robe, would come out when I was there. But I didn't see him. But when I had the story from Brad, I realized that here's a guy who drove from San Francisco to meet me up in Mount Shasta or the Dunsmuir area just to tell me the story. So I said, this guy's not blowing smoke, Scott,
Yeah. The mountain's riddled. I mean, it's volcanic, George, and all this water comes down from the mountain through these volcanic tunnels, and they come out in this town of Dunsmuir where we're talking about, where this Moss Spray Falls and this entrance into the mountain is. And this is like probably, what would you say, Stefan, 8 miles from Mount Shasta?
Yeah, it's 11 miles from where that door, those back doors, I'll call them, are located. That's what J.C. Brown said. So it's 11 miles, and so that's exactly what it is there from that location. There are a lot of stuff that's happening there. I'll give you a real quick example.
30 seconds before the break, Steph.
A friend that we met, George, who was drilling a well near Dunsmuir, right near the property that we're speaking of, and when he dug down, 10 feet down from the ground, it was hollow, nothing, no earth below it, just hollow ground. So the earth there was hollow right underneath his property. So there goes as well.
Okay, my friends, stay with us. We're going to come back in a moment with Stefan Sindoni and talk more about the inner earth. Plus, we're going to take your phone calls. Final calls next on Coast to Coast AM. Beyond Belief, that's our television program, and you can watch it 99 cents for the entire month of any month you want. Simply go to the website beyondbelief.com, beyondbelief.com, and next hour, by the way, we talk about the magic and your imagination. So I'm looking forward to that. And when we come back in a moment, we'll take your final calls as we talk about the inner earth. Welcome back. Stefan Sindoni with us. Your phone calls, of course. Stefan, what's your next venture? What do you do next?
Well, right now I'm coming out of semi-retirement, so right now I'm just trying to stay under the radar, but I've been challenged lately because of the research I've done, so I've now been creating internet security videos to help people such as myself be able to surf the internet without interference.
Oh, really? Have you been getting attacked?
Oh, I've lost 2
Understatement.
motherboards and 2 different computers. If I can give you a quick minute, I'll just tell you what people can do. One, Windows computers are the easiest for a hacker to gain access. One of the best ways to safeguard your computer is the following way: is set up your administrator account to only be used to update your software to add new programs, and then set up a standard user and use it only exclusively to limit the liability for hackers. So if they access your computer, they can only access your standard user, which can be easily deleted when you go back in with your administrator without losing your computer. Another thing people can do is set up their guest account and only use that to watch DVDs, because a lot of times you got to power up your computer because the battery, it gets drained. So to keep the hackers out, just use your guest account if you plan to watch DVDs and be powered into a cord in your computer. Always be hardwired, George. Don't use Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is spy-fi. I've come to the realization that even with a 30-character password, a good hacker can crack the computer password within 72 hours. A Wi-Fi range is about 100 yards, and
Yeah, it is.
A Bluetooth is deceiving because it has a range of also 100 yards and doesn't even provide password protection. If you're going to surf the internet, Tor has a hidden browser that allows you to surf anonymously. Right now, for me, I don't either use Apple or Microsoft to surf the internet. I'm a Linux guy now, and I've installed Ubuntu, and the easiest way to do it is just to convert an old computer. You can go on YouTube, will tell you how to do it. If you're traveling with a cell phone, remove your battery while you're traveling. If you really want to be, security conscious, purchase a second memory card and store your important phone numbers on it. Only install that when you want to make a phone call. Definitely avoid social media because silence is golden. Well, I tell people your shoe size, where you live, where you work, where your kids go to school, and next thing you know, you make yourself a target. So see, there's just so many ways that people can stop the New World Watchers from acquiring their information. And these are things that, like Eric Snowden didn't want to tell you, but I'm here to tell you because this is the only interview I'll probably do this year. And but I am, sharing this for people who want to go out there and be able to live in a world where everything they say or do is not being under a microscope or being recorded. And unfortunately, it's very difficult. With some of these tips, hopefully those listening will follow them, and they'll be better off for doing it.
Let's go to Tacoma, Washington now. Ezekiel's with us. Welcome to the show, Ezekiel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norrie, for taking my call,
Sure
and thank you very much, Mr. Stefaniak, for hearing me out as well. George, this weekend, you guys had on a guest, David Schwartz.
Yes.
Speaking with Richard Serrett on your Easter program.
Mm-hmm.
I, sir, would challenge your guest, who has made it come to an issue of faith on his part, and he is saying faith on the people that side on the side of belief in the Bible. I simply would ask him himself to listen to the truth in that man's voice. That man renounced his faith, walked away from the world he knew, left a life that he had been trained into, sir, because his contact and his work on the Turin Project led him to a truth within himself that made him renounce his faith and accept Christianity. I can simply say to you, sir, that if faith becomes a question for you, look around to those examples that you have around you and absorb some of that for yourself. And I'll take that off air. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if we're going to convert you tonight, Stefan, but go ahead.
I tell you, I grew up in a Roman Catholic household, went to Catholic school, watched brothers and priests molest other children under the guise of Christianity, so I just have a hard time buying it, for myself. Because, man, when you take a man, George, and you make him holier than thou, and you tell people that they're supposed to believe in someone and respect them, and you watch them do things like this, and then the Catholic Church sweeps it under the rug and they pay millions and billions of dollars just to keep this stuff out of the newspapers, then it's pretty difficult to follow, religious philosophy when you break it down. And if you go back and you look and you see stories are borrowed from other versions of other texts, the New Testament is all borrowed from other texts, and people who talk about it end up dead, like Eric Parker, for example, who I'll preface here today, who dared to speak about it, and other people who challenge it. All of a sudden, I've heard radio broadcasts. All of a sudden, the microphones get all screwed up. You don't hear them. All of a sudden, it's high pitches. Why? Because they're questioning religion, because it's big business, and whether people like it or not, they want to believe. Like, I don't need a big brother, George. I don't need a father figure, and I don't need for someone to tell me something that they have no way to prove it. And then when it's all said and done, when I have questions, say, well, you have to have faith. Well, who's on first?
Yeah, George? But you don't have to prescribe to the Catholic teachings to be a believer.
No, I agree, but I'm just saying from the walk of faith that I came from. I can only talk about my personal perception of it. I can't talk about anybody else's. I can only talk about what I saw, what I've seen, and what I experienced. And if I take one thing from it, it would be the golden rule: do unto others as you want done unto yourself. And if everybody followed that rule, we probably wouldn't have any wars today.
Jeff is in Culver City, California. Jeffrey, you're up.
Hey, hi, George and Mr. Sindoni. Yeah, I once read in a National Geographic magazine article several years ago about these huge caves in Vietnam, very deep up under the earth. Water, sunlight, and air all flowed in somehow, and the geographical researchers believe that there were people living down there pretty much like we live here up above the earth, but obviously without all of the accoutrements of modernity. My question is this, Mr. Sindoni: do you believe that there are human beings or human-like existence up under the oceans of the world who live and breathe as we do, but perhaps in some type of mermaid-like creation, like with dolphin intelligence capabilities, capable of accessing, human telepathy or whatever? And I just want to get your answer off there.
Well, I can tell you there's been a scientist who made a discovery with the bathysphere up in near the North Pole area, and a mermaid happened upon their bathysphere holding onto the window. They actually saw it, and so there was also one sighting on the beach, that one came up on the beach, but when this fella tried to make it go public, they made his life a living hell because he had seen something. Now, how can this happen? Well, if the Anunnaki created all different beings, all different species, and you hear mythology to talk about, the sphinxes, half man, half bird, half this and that, and then you realize that the mermaid, could be something like that. Now, the mermaid that I'm talking about is up in North Waters. So I profess that this mermaid, there's an inner earth opening near the North Pole area, the Baffin Bay area, which this was found, which comes in and out, which exists on the inside and the outside. There's 11 rivers in the northern area, the North Pole, all freshwater rivers that come out from the inner earth. Now, icebergs mysteriously are created, but they're not created out of salt water. They're created out of fresh water. So my contention is there are other water sources within the earth. Even the Bible talks about the fountains were opened up, for the great flood. So if these Anunnaki, and it goes back to the Anunnaki again, created all these hybrids and all these different creatures, then, yeah, it's very well possible that these mermaids still do exist.
Yeah, the Discovery did a show on mermaids, which may or may not have been real, but it was one heck of a program.
Oh, I think I saw that as well.
Yeah.
But the individual who brought it out, his life was made very difficult, the fact that he brought out this information. That's what happens when people bring out things that are just not of the norm. They then go after them. They go after the messenger, because all of a sudden they're waking people up. I mean, people can believe what they want to believe, but when you start going after the person for just their thoughts and ideas, it's sad.
Let's go to Beverly in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hi, Bev. First-time caller.
I am so glad you could take my call.
Sure thing.
I come from a family where my great-grandmother belonged to a cult in Chicago that believed we live on the inside of the earth. And that cult was chased out of Chicago after some years, and Ragamuffin part of it went to Florida. One of the sisters, or one of the daughters, went with the cult to Florida. It's well documented because my great-grandfather sued for divorce in the late 1800s to get his girls out of that cult. And he won the divorce, but the judge said as long as the mother took the girls out of the cult, that she didn't have to give them up. We've always wondered if there was any truth in that.
Well, you had the St. Germain Foundation. Initially, their headquarter office was in Chicago. It still very well may be. So there are a number of organizations like that. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to, that believe in the existence of an inner world.
I just don't see how they can do that. But my great-grandmother was a school teacher, and you would think that she had enough brains to know, sorry to say.
Well, you know what? It's what I call
woman.
a leap of faith, ma'am. I mean, there are people that want, they need a father figure. They want to accept, they want to believe, and they don't mind putting their life in someone's hands who's going to be their savior and their all with all to make their life better. I mean, you call it weak-minded if you want. Maybe sometimes too much education is a downfall, or just believing, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So in her particular case, it's just a matter of maybe naivety.
Stephan, isn't Hopi prophecy discuss another major war with the United States where the United States basically crumbles?
Yes. It does, yes. And, and that's what I alluded to earlier about bad karma with the United States. And what I'm getting, George, my guidance that I get tells me that until we resolve what we've done to the Native American people, till we pay them restitution for what they've done, till we fess up. I mean, you've got...
and we may never do that.
Well, that's the problem. Here's the thing, George. Every empire that we've ever read about has had a shelf life, and it's crumbled. And the United States is on the same course as well. It's just a matter of time. You look at this stuff, and capitalism, is such that it doesn't work. I've heard about, you talk about people don't even have $500 to fix their car. It's like you want change. Well, how much change do I have left of $1? A quarter? So you think about, what we've allowed ourselves to become. And as a nation, a great nation that we once were, we're not as strong as we were. And the sad thing is, no one wants to recognize it. No one wants to step up to the plate to help fix it.
Carlos is in Waterford, New York now. Carlos, you're up with us. Go ahead.
How's it going? This is a great topic today, and I'm really grateful that you brought up Vine Deloria and that whole indigenous history, because that's something that I study passionately. But what's really interesting, I want to get your take on, is if you studied Central America or not, because I'm from Honduras, and there's one group, an indigenous group there called the Pech, who have legends of so-called aliens. And so, I've heard about the lost city the so-called lost city they supposedly found there within the last month or so, and it's been untouched by humanity for such a long time. So I found that really fascinating, because I'm wondering if maybe, this kind of correlates to the hollow earth theory at all, if there were people there before or who were under the earth or not, because not many people have really spoken of that outside of the indigenous.
Well, this all goes back again to the Anunnaki, and I'll throw a name out, Ningajita, who came to the Americas, the South America, Central America, and he's the one responsible for the hollow earth in your area, in Honduras, South America, the Andes, and so on and so forth. And when these things are all come out, whether it's now or 50 years from now, then people will realize that, there's been a great deception that's been going on for a very long, long time.
But why?
Why? Control, yeah. George. I mean, here's the thing, George. If a race of people wanted to come here and needed to mine for gold, for example, because their planet, the ozone layer, was dying.
Sounds like Nibiru.
Well, there we go. So so now you know where I'm going. So here you've got a planet. You need a resource. This planet's got a ton of it, and you need people to mine for gold, people to slave for you to get these things you need, so that way you can replenish your planet. But in the process of all this, greed sets in, control, power sets in, and now all of a sudden you have enslavement. And now what you have is a prison planet, and then the people that are in power, they set their remnants to continue through monarchies to keep this thing going, so that way they can continue to rape the earth. What I can tell you is, in the earth, gold is important, but crystals are probably where they're mining for the most inside of the earth. and they're taking it to wherever galaxy or planet that they go to, because I believe crystals are one of the biggest commodities that are being raped from our planet.
Okay, we've got Jim in Kentucky now. Jim, let's get you in. Go ahead.
Yes. Actually, my question for Stephan is, actually about 10 years ago, my wife and I spent about a year at Leech Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota. A prominent member of the American Indian movement led us to a place in South Dakota where we met a Native American, a Lakota, who explained to us that a part of the Lakota origin story was that some of them had emerged from Wind Cave in South Dakota. As well, I've heard as Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is also a place that is supposed to lead to what most call the inner earth. And I'm wondering, have you visited either? And what?
Well, I've heard stories about Mammoth Cave in a book called Avid, and talks about a man who goes into Mammoth Cave and ends up into an inner world there. So yeah, there is a hollow earth entrance there at Mammoth Cave in Kentucky.
Stephan, will we ever get a concerted scientific expedition to go into the inner earth?
Well, part of the problem is if they're tenured, no. If they get funding, no. If it's an independent group, possibly yes. But then you got to worry about people threatening them and telling them that if they go to do something like that, their lives, their family members, may never see the light of day. So it's a matter of life and longevity, and say, you know what, it's a great idea, I pass.
Are they that concerned that we're going to find out?
Absolutely. George, I've had many, many things happen to me in my life because of this. I've had wounds and scars. I have things that have happened that I don't even want to share tonight. I can just tell you right now that because of these things, I would continually do much more research, but because I value my life, I've decided that, I'm
it's
in
not
retirement, and this is my last interview for 2015. But, yeah, there are people that if you mention something and you get people on that bandwagon, then all of a sudden you become, a statistic.
All right, Steph, I want you to take it easy and be safe, okay?
Well, George, I take it one moment at a time because that's all I'm given, so I'm going to enjoy the present as we live it.
Okay, and you need to track him down, look at his website. He's got some interesting things there.